Coming in at number 10, we have a video game based on a TV series. When released in 2013, The Walking Dead TV show was near its peak of live viewership. With over 10 million viewers on a regular basis, it seemed like the perfect time to release The Walking Dead Survival Instinct. While the hype was sure to be there for the video game, Activision took a chance with game developer Terminal Reality. However, their decision did not pan well for gamers or the company. The game was instantly panned by critics and users alike, citing poor graphics, a boring story, and an archaic design. Compared to other zombie-based games that were popular during this time, Survival Instinct took a no-thrills approach to survival, ultimately giving the gamer overly repetitive tasks of sneaking up on zombies. Metacritic ratings reflected the feelings as well. While the user ratings were somewhat mixed, giving the game a 4.0 out of 10, critics absolutely slammed the game, with 93% giving negative reviews, 7% mixed, and not one solitary positive review, leaving the game with a lowly 32 out of 100 rating. To further solidify the failure of this game, Terminal Reality, the game's developer, closed its doors later that year. It's safe to assume that their poor handling of the development of the Walking Dead game had some correlation with going out of business. At number 9, we have a video game that attempted to change its direction due to a growing adult audience. In 2010, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 released as a film and as a video game. While the movie did quite well, the game did not follow suit. EA Games wanted to cater to their audience, who was getting older, and while they certainly made changes from previous game titles, they weren't necessarily good ones. The game had terrible lip syncing, odd camera angles, and felt extremely one-dimensional. Players could simply beat the entirety of the game by spamming the same button over and over. Not exactly what an aging audience is looking for. These dumbfounding changes helped give a user score of 4.4 out of 10 on Metacritic, while a 38 out of 100 was the critic score. It's hard to remember a time when gamers were split between two NBA games, but back in 2013, NBA Live and 2K were still fighting for the player base. While some would say that NBA 2K had held superiority for some time, EA Sports was not letting NBA Live go away. At least not yet. Interestingly enough, in 2012, EA actually canceled their release of that year's title, pointing to the game's poor development. Therefore, when fans finally got the release of NBA Live 14, they were expecting an extremely polished game since it had taken twice as long of a development as their previous titles. And if not for the next generation of consoles releasing during that time, things may have played out differently. When NBA Live 14 was finally released, it felt like the game was developed for previous generations of the consoles. It had poor graphics for the time, and player animations were clunky and quirky. To make matters worse, NBA 2K14 looked immaculate on the new consoles, and had very few bugs to complain about. This game as well had 0 positive reviews from critics, coming in with a whopping 43 out of 100 on Metacritic. However, it was gamers that truly picked this game apart, giving it a measly 2.6 out of 10. NBA Live 14 did itself no favors, and likely caused most of its player base to jump ship to NBA 2K. This is only further validated by the fact that EA only developed a few more NBA Live titles before officially giving it up after 2019. Although we all want adaptations to be incredible, they usually aren't, but I think I know the reason. They don't have family. Well, I guess that doesn't even matter because Fast and Furious CrossRoads is the next on our list, and we all know that's the favorite saying for Dominic Toretto. While the game was meant to bridge the story between Fast and Furious movies, the game was surprisingly short and simple. Gamers were expecting spectacular feats like the movies had portrayed in recent years, but it was mainly just a simple racing game, thus getting torn to shreds on Metacritic. While critics were not overbearingly negative to the game, this is our first title on the list that has a user score under 2 out of 10. Coming in at 1.7. For a video game company that published Elden Ring, I think we could have expected a little bit more than what was delivered. Would you just look at that, yet another film adaptation on the list. To be fair, Iron Man was not necessarily a bad game compared to the others on this list, at least not for the Xbox 360 and PS3. Where the real issues came in with the game were with the Wii, the PS2, and PSP version. Yeah, remember when we had PSPs? Oh, those were the days. Regardless, the game achieved scores around 45% on Metacritic for various consoles. That can mainly be attributed to the polished nature of the game. Sega truly took pride in making this game look and feel absolutely incredible. However, they perhaps could have put a bit more time into the story, as by mid-game, gamers were tasked with repetitive missions that never gave much substance to the plot of the game. Before we get to the top 5, I just want to thank you all for watching, and if you don't mind, leave a like or comment if you enjoy, as it truly does help push the video out to more people. And check this out, over 99% of the people watching my videos are not subscribed. Let's see if we can get 10 subscribers from this video, and I truly appreciate you all. Alright, now on to the top 5. Topping off the rest of this list, we begin with a major disappointment. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games were a massive success for many kids growing up. From 1999 to 2002, Tony Hawk's Pro Skaters 1 through 4 were overwhelmingly successful, gaining critical acclaim. I still remember spending hours trying to hit crazy grinds and tricks way back in the day. Unfortunately, Neversoft, the developer for those games, moved on to creating Guitar Hero titles and sold the rights to a company by the name of Robomoto. In 2008, the company was tasked with continuing the franchise. First, they tried to make a few spin-offs, including Ride, Shred, and Pro Skater HD, all of which failed miserably. However, in 2014, they finally announced the return of the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series. However, Activision, who was set to publish the game, had a licensing deal with Tony Hawk that expired in 2015. And even though Robomoto consulted with former Neversoft developers to create the game, the development was rushed and pushed to release, resulting in an abysmal, disappointing installment in the otherwise flawless franchise. Metacritic ratings recognized this disappointment, as critics gave it a poor 32 out of 100, but the fans were the ones who truly were let down. It had been 13 years since a Tony Hawk game had been released, and when gamers actually got their hands on the game, any hype and anticipation quickly grinded to a halt, finishing with an overwhelmingly low score of 1.5 out of 10. At number 4, we have Kung Fu Panda 2. Published by THQ, the game was unfortunately rushed as it was trying to capitalize on the movie release, and as you may have guessed, was not a polished game. Frame rate issues and glitches plagued this game from day one, with no solution in the works. Players quickly found a glitch where you can spam a single attack that would keep any enemy from touching you. One positive note the game had is that it was on Kinect for the Xbox 360, which provided a little bit of extra character, but we all know that was a quickly passing phase. Thus, the game raked in a lovely minimal score on Metacritic. Yet another adaptation of a movie sits atop the worst 3 games on this list. The Ghostbusters franchise has spanned decades and has brought laughter to many families during that time. Recent reboots of the movies have brought the franchise back to life after a disappointing turnout for the 2016 reboot. Similar of the reception to the movie, the game didn't fare much better. Worse, actually. Yet another hit to Activision, the game received the title for the worst reviewed game of 2016. That's out of all video games, not just AAA titles. It was labeled as a flat-out cash grab attempt to capitalize on the reboot of the franchise, and the game underdelivered massively. Gamers and critics cited an empty, cumbersome game that was filled with boredom and repetition. Metacritic ratings reflected that, with a critic rating of 30 out of 100 and a user score of merely 1.4 out of 10. Our top 2 games, surprisingly, are not actually adaptation games. Rather, they are sports games, possibly some of the worst sporting games to ever exist. At number 2, we have eFootbal 2022. This game was designed to have a managerial role in forming a team, choosing coaches, and training players to take on the entire world. However, Konami missed the mark on developing a game that was actually enjoyable to play. Often described as slow and stiff, gamers essentially found no joy in playing this game. Many user reviews claimed that this is the worst soccer game ever created, while other players take it one step further and say it was the worst game ever created in general, but that actually isn't true, as the worst reviewed game of all time is much worse. And if that sounds interesting to you, make sure to hit that subscribe button, as that video is going to be coming out soon. eFootbal 22 was an absolute disgrace, ranking in another grotesque user score of merely 1.4 out of 10. Now, before we get to number 1, here are some honorable mentions. As much as I hate to say it, Halo Infinite was indeed a failure. The game sparked massive interest upon its announcement, and the hype remained until its release. However, within mere months, the player base vanished. Many cited the fact that the game doesn't have a battle royale and needed one to survive. Developers, though, still continue to push out new updates to the game for the few loyal fans of the franchise. Cyberpunk 2077 was hyped up beyond belief. Some compared the build-up to the release of the first Avatar movie. The game was supposed to change the landscape of video games for the foreseeable future. However, once gamers actually got their hands on it, they realized that the game was not near completion. Bugs and glitches littered the game everywhere, and Cyberpunk quickly became the butt of many jokes in the gaming world. Our last honorable mention is one that might be a little controversial. Bethesda is known for making immaculate games with incredible stories. However, Fallout 76 was a rare flaw in their system. The game was overly repetitive, and there were essentially no interactions outside of the vault. While some players still found ways to have fun with the game, the player base declined until it was an irrelevant game. Now, the number 1 spot on this list is a game truly so horrendous, I apologize for even showing you the footage. NBA Unrivaled is undoubtedly the worst basketball game ever developed. Perhaps Timco mistakenly saw an opportunity to jump into the NBA gaming space and compete with NBA Live and 2K, but they never should have. While it looks like the game may have been developed in the late 1990s, it was actually published in 2009. It appears that Timco was going for an arcade-style realistic mixed game that resulted in no identity. The game was slow and offered unengaging gameplay, jerky animations, and strange glitches that ultimately resulted in the lowest critic score of this list as a mere 25 out of 100. The game was so bad that users on Metacritic didn't even bother to review this game, probably because they didn't even know it existed. That's all for today, guys, but make sure to be looking out for my next video where I cover the worst rated video games of all time.